Thank you very much, Lucy. And Kate sends her apologies. She's sorry she couldn't be with you today, so I'm afraid you've got me instead. As Lucy says, I'm Head of Resilience Planning at Newcastle City Council. That's the hat I'm wearing, or the shoes I'm wearing for this presentation. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit of a story. And for those of you that are familiar with Ladybird books, you could actually have titled this The Hole That Grew and Grew. Back in May, we had a little hole. It appeared out of the middle of nowhere, underneath a wall, on a very small road in Newcastle, which led to this estate of flats. And we did what local authorities do. We went and we looked down the hole, and then we put fences around it. And then we realised, oh, there's a culvert underneath that hole, which carries an awful lot of water. So we put pumps in place, and we contacted the landowner. And then we found out what was down the hole. This hole, there was a culvert underneath, about 15 metres down. So it's a long way down. And I've just go back to that picture. I just want to clarify something. This picture here, for the observant of you in the audience, you will have noticed that the Colonel had that up on his presentation earlier on. There were no military deployed to this event at all. They did not help us take it down. And we decided the Royal Engineers probably couldn't save it. And just to give you an idea as well of how we actually got to that point, if the first hole appeared in May, this happened in September. So the people who are living in this area, I just want you to keep this in the back of your mind as I go through this a case study story, we'll call it what you will, is that the timescales involved. This was not something that happened quickly. And just, it's still going on. So think about the pressure that this is putting on people, the mental health pressure that this is putting on people, the responders and the people who the residents in that area. The first flood happened on the 10th of June. So the hole appeared in May. First flood happened on the 10th of June. We then had Thunder Thursday. We've seen the lovely pictures of the Tyne Bridge being struck by lightning. It flooded, unsurprisingly. We then had a couple of more floods in July and August. Oh, and we had the Olympics, we had football. And then on the 25th and the 26th of September, we had 3 days of heavy rain, which basically resulted in this. And the hole just gradually got bigger, and the valley was reforming itself. So, what were we dealing with? Culvert was 15 metres down. We discovered we had a 33-inch water main down there. Now, those of you that know anything about water mains will know that these are high-pressure things. They will cut steel if they start to leak. If it had gone pop, it would have washed people away. The force of the water is that strong. We also had a gas pipeline, electricity cable, all the other things that you get underneath, like that knitting underneath roads. Fibre optic cable we discovered under there, which apparently was carrying restricted MOD information. We didn't find any partridges or pear trees. The water main also was one of only 3 for the whole city, one of which was already down for cleaning. So we've actually gone through most of this summer with one water main going into Newcastle. So what did we do? The first thing we did was we looked down the hole, and we put fence around it, and we put pumps in place. The residents, so what was the immediate impact on the residents? Well, there's a young couple that's got a flat that overlooked the hole, and they actually had their flat on the market, and they'd sold it. The day the hole appeared, the sale fell through, understandably. They then got another buyer for the flat. The next day, the estate flooded. They were not happy people, as I'm sure you can imagine. But that's just one example of the impact this had on the residents, and they were watching this hole basically get bigger. The landowners, well, as in all of these incidents, it's never easy. With a culvert, the landowner is responsible for maintaining it and making sure that water can pass through it. But of course, this culvert collapsed right on the border of 2 landowners. So between May and June, when the first flood happened, there were some arguments going on about who actually owned the land. It's now become very clear that the culvert has collapsed on the Duke of Northumberland's estate. Dunelm Homes owns the land where the buildings are, because the flats were on leasehold. Property managers, because it was a freehold area, Spencer Court, which is where the flats are, has a property management company. The first time the hole appeared, not really much for them to do. It's a hole in the road. The council's going to fix it. Local schools just across the way, there was a school, there was a primary school and a nursery school. Again, the whole first appeared, not much for them to do. As the incident progressed, it did start to impact on them because we had to close footpaths, we had to close roads, which meant that getting kids to and from the school was extremely difficult, and we had to put on a bus service. And on the service providers, well, Northumbrian Water actually had to switch that high pressure main off when we got the first flood. We had to kind of sort out the electrics, we had to roll back the fibre optics. There was all kinds of things going on within that hole. And of course, these were all part of our community that we're dealing with. So to start with, what we did was we did the Great Council thing. We sent them a letter. Great. We sent them a letter and we told them that it wouldn't take long for us to mend this hole. What we forgot to do was then write to them and say, well, actually, it's going to probably take about a year to fix this hole because there's a culvert 15 metres down. And when I come on to public meetings, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Then on the 10th of June, we had our first flood of the site. And it became apparent that we actually had to do a lot more in the way of public engagement. So we had public meetings set up. The flood happened on the Sunday, and we had a public meeting on the Monday night at the local school. We had local presence, so we had engineers on site, and the other agencies involved, the other partners, the landowners, also had people on site. We put a site cabin in place so people could drop in and get information. We set up email lists, so we were sending out daily email bulletins to people to give them information. We provided them with name contacts within the different organisations so they could ask the questions that they wanted to ask. And you don't need me to tell this, but the demand for information was constant. Tell them everything that you can so that they can make informed decisions. So why did we change our strategy? Well, it's pretty obvious, really. It had moved from being a hole in the road, being a fairly small risk, to being something that actually was pretty major and was affecting people's lives. And the 10th of June, there was a decision made to evacuate the apartments, or to evacuate 3 of the apartment blocks within Spencer Court. And yes, there were some flats that were flooded, but you wouldn't normally evacuate a first floor flat. People's possessions were waterlogged, but the reason we actually made the decision to evacuate the apartments was because we were concerned the foundations were being undermined, and we were also concerned that the foundations for the 33-inch water main was going to be undermined, and that would then go off pop, and it would wash the houses away, and we would actually probably have deaths. And the interesting thing is that decision was made by my Director of Technical Services from the local authority. Probably the first time he's had to make a decision like that actually on the ground. He was working with the fire service at the time. And they just, the dynamic risk assessment that took place. So for our local authority officers working on the ground, there's been some steep learning curves. So the situation had got more complex. We needed a more complex solution in the way that we were helping people understand what was going on. So why did we do what we did? Well, we've already talked about the different communities that we had, and we talked about the effect that this had on them and the disruption that this was having to their lives. So we knew that the communities were disrupted. We knew that people needed information. People were angry about what had happened, quite understandably. They wanted to understand why this was happening to them. Why hadn't this small hole in the road been fixed? It happened in May. It happened weeks ago. Why wasn't it fixed? Why has this happened to me? Why has this water got into my block of flats? Whose fault is it? So we needed to tell them they had a right to know what they were facing. They needed to understand what we were dealing with as well. But we also needed to understand where they were coming from so that we could adapt our response to them. We needed to build between us a common understanding of what was going on that site. And throughout the summer, that site has got more and more complicated. It's the one site, if something's going to go wrong, it will go wrong on that site. This morning, somebody said you needed to plan for things that you don't plan for. You need to be able to respond to the things that you don't plan for. When you sit in a meeting and somebody says, an ecologist has just been down to the river where we're digging out the landslip mud, and they've found Japanese knotweed, there is no way on this earth you would ever write that into an exercise because you'd been told to not stop being stupid. Fortunately, it hadn't been disturbed and we didn't have to deal with it but it did put a kink in things. So as it's just got more and more complicated, so we as responders have needed to understand this, and we have, as responders have also needed to convey this to residents who have been living with this for months. So really, we were building the ultimate common recognised information picture, which we were sharing with everybody involved. So what were the challenges that we faced as partners? Well, being shouted at. You go to a public meeting, the first thing you say to people is, we knew this was going to take a year to fix, and they say, well, you wrote to us and told us it was going to take 6 weeks. You're going to get shouted at. It's not a very pleasant experience, but you're there with your badge for Newcastle City Council or whatever. You deal with it. The situation just changed rapidly, and it got worse. Each flood event got worse. Each flood event, we thought we'd put something in place. The landowners had put something in place to mitigate this. We kept telling residents, it's okay, we think we've got it sorted now, and then residents were flooded again. This constant wearing, this constant worry that people living around that area were watching this evolve. We were working with unfamiliar partners. We were working with organisations that aren't Cat 1 or Cat 2 responders. They've never worked with us before. They don't know whether they trust us or not. They've got litigation issues. They've got 2 landowners who are probably going to end up in court over this. And this is a really big learning point for me personally, in that, well, a lot of what we do when we're writing plans and we're doing testing and exercises is predicated on the fact that we will be working with Category 1 and Category 2 responders. We will be working with the friends that we've already made. We weren't. And we never would have been. I wouldn't normally work with Northumberland Estates. I wouldn't work with Dunelm Homes. But we had to, very, very quickly, get that mutual understanding, that mutual trust between us. So even though there are liability issues, we can still come together and deal with the problems actually on the site and keep the residents at the forefront of our mind. So what were the advantages to this? Well, because this incident has gone on for a long time, we've actually been able to build these relationships. We've built the relationships with the partners who are dealing with the situation. We've also built relationships with the residents on the site as well. There's a member of my team who's got the email address of the head of the Residents Association, in direct contact with us. So then we know what they're going through. We're getting feedback from them. We know what's working and what isn't. We have got an understanding of what the residents were facing. We also realised, after holding 2 or 3 of these very shouty public meetings, that really that wasn't helping. It wasn't helping anybody. It wasn't helping the responders. Wasn't helping the residents. So we set up a debrief session with them to try and break this cycle. And I have to say, Lucy came and did a sterling job with the residents and had a 2-hour session talking to them. They haven't been through enough. We haven't invited her back yet. And just talked through with them, what were their concerns? What was it that they were going through? Helping them understand that what they were feeling was normal. They are in a stressful situation. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to be upset. To understand that something that they were worried about was mould within the flats and how that was going to affect their neighbours. So getting advice from the PCT and the Health Protection Agency and being able to give them exactly what it was that they were asking for. To actually say to them, Lucy says, she said she talked to a group of them, and there were people saying there things like, I'm okay, it's just I can't sleep. I'm okay, I just can't concentrate. It's okay, I'm okay, I'm just getting angry. So helping them understand that actually these are stress reactions, and the situation that they're in is perfectly normal for them to have those kind of reactions. And also letting the local GPs know that this was going on in the area. So if people were presenting to the local GPs with particular symptoms, it might not be that it might be a side effect of something that was going on with regards to the flooding. So by September, what were we left with? And I'll just talk through this map a little bit so you can kind of get a feel for the physical area. What you've got, this blue blob up here, this is actually called the Winnings. This is where the water gathers. So you've got all this really unpleasant flood water here. This is another Dean coming into the site. This is where they think the collapse is. This is where they've been digging a very large hole. It's about 10 metres wide. This is a brickyard, and the wall that you saw in the picture was the boundary wall for this brickyard. And this land was also owned by Northumberland Estates. The business here got moved out. They found an alternative site. This is Spencer Court. So this is where it first happened. And on this site, there were 5 blocks of flats. 3 of them were evacuated in June. They're still out, and they're going to be out for a few more months yet. 2 of the blocks of flats were evacuated in September, but they'd been living on that site with all the building work going on around them, with all the flooding going on around them, watching all this going on. The block of flats that you've seen on stilts was there. That's now gone. It was taken down. And I have to say, one of the dark points of the whole incident was sitting in a public meeting after the floods in September, and a new partner just off the cuff saying, "We'll be taking that block of flats down." Just a throwaway comment. Hadn't been decided, and none of the residents knew that was even on the table, and they found out in a public meeting. Not a good thing. This area here is some social housing owned by Your Homes Newcastle, who were undermined in September, and they were evacuated as well. They were rehomed by Your Homes Newcastle, so we've got a different community there that were affected a bit later on in the incident. This is an open water area, and the banks of this collapsed because of the weight of water in the pipes. And then this area here is Mill Vale. Now, Mill Vale is made up of owner-occupiers, and you've got some houses here who are evacuated because their supplies are off and can't be let back in. And these people have been living, watching this go on around them in the same way these two blocks of flats were. These 2 blocks of flats are out. These people are still here. And I had a conversation with one of the residents because we were putting in place a text warning system when we were talking it through, and I said to him, now the irony in this is I'm head of resilience. I live on a floodplain. Yes, I know. And I actually said to him, I said, I understand the pressure that you're under, watching this going on, wondering if something's going to happen. I live on a floodplain. It's something that when it rains, you think about. And he said to me, yes, but I didn't buy a house on a floodplain. I bought a house on a hill. And that's the kind of pressure that these people are under. Okay. Oh, that's good timing. Last slide. Right. So, disadvantages. Sorry, I've skipped aside. So the disadvantage of this is hard work. It is hard work. You're constantly working to kind of adapt your response, to make adjustments, to take into account what the residents need. You become personally invested in this as a responder. You become within the incident. It becomes long, drawn out. And you actually set some really high expectations amongst residents and amongst other partners as well about what your response is going to be like in the future. But it's been really worthwhile. The links that we've developed with the communities, the advantages that we've got, we because we treated the residents as partners throughout this, we gave them information which allowed them to make informed decisions. It meant that we had a bird's eye view of what they were going through. It meant that we could tailor the support that we provided to make sure that we answered their specific needs and questions. We got talking therapies involved so that people knew that there were things out there to help them cope with this. We provided them with tools to help them deal with their situation. What we didn't do was do it all for them. We gave them the contacts, we gave them the information, and then they could make their decision about what the best position was for them. Our contact with the residents has helped us to understand how they're likely to respond if we give them information. It also means that we know how to frame the information and the advice that we give to them as well, and kind of what kind of additional stress this might put on them. We've had lots and lots of engineering and technical meetings, as you can imagine, because it's a very technical situation, and the solution needs to be some really strong engineering solutions. I've learned an awful lot about pumping and pipes, more than I really wanted to know. But because I was sitting in those meetings, we were constantly able to get the engineering meetings to take into account the response of the people and the needs of the people. It meant that we could mitigate some of the things that have happened. I mean, one really good example was the taking down of that building. They didn't demolish it, they dismantled it, and they actually arranged for the guy who was dismantling it with one of his long arms, grabber, to actually lift out people's pieces of furniture, large pieces of furniture, which they then arranged to be taken off site so people can go through. And that was actually as a direct result of our conversations with the community, so people could get their precious possessions out of that, because they hadn't been able to go back in and rescue things like photographs. Now, has this made a difference? I haven't got any proof whether what we've done has actually mitigated the long-term impact of this, but I do think that from the relationships that we've developed with the residents, that they've valued the approach, and I believe that we have mitigated some of the impact. I don't underestimate the amount of work that this approach takes. It's tiring, but it's hugely valuable. And the next steps that we have in place are around gathering stories from the residents. We've got some sessions where we're going to go out and talk to the community, so we can actually understand whether what we did made things better or worse. And I think the thing that that's really come across to me is that this situation, it was a site that had an acute incident followed by a chronic incident with chronic stress, with more acute incidents thrown in. And it just didn't get better, and it's still not fixed. People are living with this. They're still living with this day in, day out. And I just wonder what kind of toll this is taking on the residents that are there.